welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely fascinating and deeply affecting novel. It is somehow timeless and extremely contemporary, current to the moment. It's doing a lot of things that are all extremely fascinating, and I am so excited to be talking about it with its author. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Of course. Hi, I'm Isabel J. Kim, and I'm the author of Sublimation. Sublimation is, you mentioned timely, and I've been introducing sublimation with, I wish it was not relevant to the present moment, but it is, because sublimation is a story about set in a universe where when you cross the border with the intention to leave, you split into two people, one person who stays in the home country and one person who goes on to the new country. And it follows a woman going back to Korea for her grandfather's funeral, where her other self is there, and her other self would love to reintegrate back into one person, and she very much does not.
That concept just grabbed me off the bat. It is so fascinating, and it introduces so many interesting questions about our society, about identity, about all sorts of really, really fascinating things. Before we get to the book itself, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your career and your writing journey. What brought you to this moment?
Okay, so Sublimation is my debut novel, so it's my first time doing all of this. It's all very exciting. But I've been writing since probably I was a teenager. I was very much one of those kids where when your English teacher gives you a crumb of praise for your fiction, you write a lot more fiction. And I've always loved novels and stories and books. And I majored in creative writing, and I thought I would like write a book someday, but it was kind of like a far off dream. And I wrote a lot of short fiction in law school and while I was working at the law firm. Spoiler alert, that's my real day job, or it was until I went full time as an author. And then I started getting traction for my short fiction, and I started seriously thinking about writing a novel. So Sublimation is based on the first short story that I had published. Homecoming is just another word for the sublimation of itself, which if you want a preview of what sublimation is about, that's a great story to read. So that's kind of how I got to here.
I'm really curious about what is the process of taking a story and making it into a full-blown novel, as it were. I'm especially curious about how many times you have to revisit that original story. And I guess like imagine the spaces that you want to grow it in. So what eyes do you bring to that story when you want to develop it into something bigger?
Mhm. So, what I like to do with my short fiction, which I think has been fairly effective, is the short story ends where the novel is at about its one third mark because it like opens a question, a wider question about the universe that the story is set in. With Sublimation, this would be a massive spoiler, so I'm not going to bring it up, but there's very much a moment where somebody makes a decision, and that decision would have massive repercussions for that character's life. And the short story ends there. But once I wrote the short story, I was like, man, this is such an interesting universe to live in because this is a universe that is so much worse than ours in a lot of ways, but also much more illuminating because basically every person in this universe, if you move or if you immigrate or if you are like forcibly taken from your home, you get to kind of know what would have happened if you had stayed because there is another version of you living that life. And that was just a concept that I really wanted to explore in the long form. So the trick was thinking about, okay, so given this character in this situation, how would she react to this major decision? And then also, where are the cracks in the story where another character or more characters might make sense? Because a short story is very much like an isolated bubble of like a couple of people's experiences just because it's hard to write more than, at least for me, it's hard to write more than a couple of people in like a small space. But then when I have the space to play with a novel, then it's like, well, okay, here's the first protagonist situation, and here's another person whose situation contrasts against hers. So that was kind of the process I went to um, when I was expanding the story and also thinking about, okay, so let's say like instancing, which is a word for this like separation, is a natural phenomenon. What do human beings love to do with natural phenomena? They love to use technology to interface with it and try and make the world something that is more amenable to them. And by them, I mean it could be a person, it could be a government, it could be a tech company. Is this a story about how tech companies and the government interfere with human migration? Who can say?
Mm. Yeah, I am really interested in that question about immigration and identity that you manifest in a very literal way here. The first part of this question is a little bit chicken or the egg. Like, did you think of oh gosh, how do I even phrase this? Like, were you thinking about the experience of metaphor and then imagined this sort of literalization of it? Or did instancing sort of come to you and then you thought about the ideas you wanted to explore? I hope that was like coherent or a question, you know?
That was coherent.
Yeah.
So I came up with the idea because I was born in New Jersey, and then pretty much immediately after, my dad got a job in Korea as a physics professor. So we moved to Korea when I was like, I want to say a couple months old, and then I spent a lot of my childhood going between actually like Korea and California while going to international school in Korea before moving finally back to the States. And then like a lot of other like diaspora kids, I ended up going to like my country of ethnic origin like relatively like often just because my dad was still working there on and off and because it's just a thing that happens. Sometimes it's just vacation and we're like in Korea. And then when I was in college and like no, sorry. Um, and then I went back when I was an adult after a couple of years, and then I started thinking about the life I would have lived had we stayed in Korea as opposed to moving back to the States when I was 11. And thinking about the way that a border isn't just a one-time barrier, but something like being from somewhere is a choice that you make to some extent, or a choice that your parents make for you, and where you feel culturally acclimated is something that happens to you over a long period of time, even though we live in a world where it takes like maybe 17 hours to get from New York to Korea. And how that is something you can keep returning to and keep seeing the life that you would have lived and keep seeing the place where you've grown up, but really you can never return to your past. All of that kind of like coalesced into me thinking about the idea of instancing.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really potent way to speak to the emotional experience, right, that you
Mhm.
are describing. And to have like this very physical manifest what if or what could have been this sort of like other path that I didn't choose or that wasn't chosen for me. It feels like being, haunted by yourself in real time almost. And
Yeah, exactly.
I was super curious too about like, the range of sort of self and instance relationships. I haven't mentioned either of the two main characters yet, but this is a great place for me to bring them up and some of the other like self and instance pairings that we see. There's like a broad array of this. I guess what this leads me to is sort of like choosing your two protagonists and how that relates
Mhm.
to how you want to build out the world through their
Mhm.
perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, so I chose the two protagonists and their journeys like very carefully in that okay, so here are the two or four protagonists, depending on how you want to split the difference. There's Soyoung Rose, who is the first main character, and then there's YJ Yujin, who is the second main character. And I chose these two people as representing two very common diaspora experiences for Asian Americans. And it's about Korean Americans because I'm Korean American, and that's the group that I am most familiar with. In another world, it's about a different diaspora group. Anyone can read this. But um, so Soyoung Rose goes to America because her mom gets a job in the States. And because of that, she immigrates as a child. And that is a decision that her parents, like her mom, makes for her. And her feelings about it are very much stemming from, well, this is something that happens to a decision that I made. Whereas for YJ Yujin, he's the other very common scenario, which is you go to a college overseas as a young adult and you realize that you're just going to stay there. And that is the decision you make with more agency, but also with the hope that you are going into a future that you think will be better for some reason, or for some reason makes more sense for you. And then this is complicated by the fact that, like, in our universe, this is all that would happen. But in their universe, both of them have left a copy of themselves behind. So for Soyoung Rose, there's a version of her in Korea that is very much like, I'm curious about what my life would have been like if I had been the one that my mother, who also instanced, had taken to America. And for YJ Yujin, like he instances as an adult. So him and his other self feel much closer because there's only a couple of years. I say a couple, it's like 6 or 7 years of like removed separation. So they feel like they're working as a unit until they don't. Whereas So Young and Rose feel very much like we are different people. And that kind of changes the way that they like move through the world. And I've gotten totally off topic on your question.
No, that's a great answer though, and I really, appreciate how nuanced, I guess, the age at which you immigrate, your family's
Mhm,
relationships across seas, how that all might sort of affect your, not only how you view yourself, but your place in the world and in your family and in your social circle and all these things.
mhm,
Um, let's talk a little bit more about world building, because I am so fascinated about this.
mhm,
Um, I love like how you think through the present day in terms of like the tech that people use, as you were just saying, sort of like to sort of like work with and around this natural
mhm,
phenomenon of instancing, but also like the deep history that you create, an entire bot, like an alternate history and an alternate literary canon. Could you talk about
mhm.
developing that?
Yes. So there is, okay, spoiler alert for the novel. There, each of the sections of the book has basically an overarching like story that like undergirds the actual narrative, which is, and by this I mean I've rewritten great parts of the Western canon and also some Eastern folktales. So basically, so for example, I rewrite the Odyssey in parts by saying that, okay, Odysseus left an instance behind when he went to go fight this war. And what happens to that story when there is a second copy of Odysseus if you want the story to remain mostly intact? And also what it means that if Odysseus instances, but his son Telemachus, when Telemachus like goes on his journey, doesn't instance, and what that says about their characters. And I also do it to the Bible and the story of Adam and Eve, where it's like they left a copy of themselves back in the garden. I do it to a like an Asian like Korean folktale. I do it to the Korean like mythology and like folktale like girding like the song Adilang. And all of this is in service of making the world seem deeper and ha making instancing seem like gravity or the moon or the stars or something that is just part of the natural order to make it really seem like these characters inhabit this world. And this is something that is like, it is taken for fact, it is taken for granted. It is not something that is like weird. It's not like, oh God, this thing has started happening to me. It's this is the thing that I have to live with. And like, for example, like I know that if I take a step, it will gravity will work to make my foot fall in a certain way. If I cross this border and I feel this way about something, I might instance. And then I think what this does is it makes the world seem like I tried really hard to make the alternate history like roughly match onto ours, and I did some very like clever like bait and switch stuff about like we don't go too far into human history because things would have changed, but we've ended up in a place that is very similar to our own, but hopefully feels real because the mythology and the history and the folktales have changed to incorporate this phenomenon.
Mm. Yeah, it feels like a really fine line to walk because you have to draw attention to the things that are different about like the world you are creating
Mhm,
from ours, but it's not different or weird or unusual for the people inhabiting the
mhm,
world. And so world building to me always kind of seemed like an iceberg, like you are
mhm,
hinting at all of the stuff that's under the surface. You can't put everything on the page because that can kind of make it seem sort of like small or self-contained, but it's like sort of like the big
mhm.
unexplored history that you are pointing to that makes it seem like really rich and real.
Hmm. Yeah, I think like maybe in like something I was thinking about a little bit when I was writing this is like The Power by I want to say it was by New. I'm totally blanking on who wrote it, but like the novel, maybe cut that out. But like I was thinking about The Power, which is like a novel in which a woman gained the ability to essentially administer electric shock, and how that is written both like most of it is written with these women and all the people in the world like discovering what they can do, and so they are thinking about it, but it's also written kind of like in the perspective of someone looking back on the past and they are talking about it like it's normal. So that was something I thought about a little bit when I was writing it. But also, yeah, my strategy, I do a lot of world building because I've written 17 short stories. Oh God, it's probably 20 by the time this is got published. So I published 20 stories. Um, and if that's the wrong number, you can yell at me on Blue Sky. And all of these are like science fiction or fantasy stories, and that means that I have 5,000 words most of the time to sell the reader on a whole world. So honestly, getting like 400 pages to sell the reader on a whole world was like that was a luxury. That was actually this was not that difficult. This was great.
Wow. Yeah, that must be really fun too when you have the story to work from and you've given yourself all of these interesting directions to work in. It's like you're creating, but you're also like extrapolating from something that's already there. Um, yeah. My last question is about your use of the second person, which I love. I love how it's used here. It's really affecting, and I don't know if I can really say why or how, but it is somehow like intimate, but also like dissociative,
Mhm.
like it's a really interesting effect.
Yes, intimate but dissociative was exactly the effect I was going for. So I'm so glad that came across. And everyone listening, I promise the second person makes sense here, and it is a deliberate choice. It
Yes.
is what I was trying to do as a second person, and the way that I was thinking about it was that this is the characters thinking about this memory after it had happened with the immediacy of it happening at once. And I was also, what I like to use the second person for is for when you want the person who is reading to feel disjointed but still intimate and very much like, what do you mean you're saying that I'm doing this? I'm not doing this in a way that using the first person doesn't. I will say I was a little bit surprised that Tor and Macmillan were totally down with me structuring the book the way that I did because this book uses the second person, the first person, and the third person. And I was honestly expecting some pushback for at least one of these because I was expecting my editor to be at some point to be like, Isabel, why did you make this so confusing? And I would have been like, it's all deliberate. I promise. I promise this reads okay. Um, but the other choice I was making with that is that all of the instances use the second person. And then once they reintegrate, they start using the third person. And that, what I was expecting that to be more obvious to people reading. And then it wasn't. And then I'm like, huh, okay, that says something about the way that people read books.
That is very interesting. Like, I think it's sort of like it makes things feel like a dream to me. I know that's not like
Mhm.
a particularly like descriptive statement, but it's sort of like feels like it's happening to you, but you're not controlling it. And so there is that weird feeling of yeah, of dissociativeness. I guess that's the only
Mhm.
real way I can put it. It works so well there. And then I think what you were just saying too about like introducing the other personhoods. This is a world in which like identity is super complicated, so like
Mhm.
pronouns are going to get really, really complicated too.
Oh yeah, pronouns like the use of I, like do
Yeah.
I think of my other self as me? Is it us? Are we a plural now?
Mm.
Um, there's a lot. I tried my best to make this a very smooth read. Like it's kind of funny because I come from a very like a literary fiction background in that like my creative writing degree was and my thesis was under a guy who was very much like, do not write science fiction in my class. So this is very much written in like a contemporary like literature style as opposed to like a science fiction style. And that was very deliberate for the purpose of making all of these strange things a very smooth read and it's like dumping you into the middle of this very strange universe.
Mm. It's so well done, and I am so excited to recommend this to all of the both the literary fiction and the sci-fi readers here at our library. What is next for you? What's on your horizon? I know you're deep in promoting this book right now, but are you writing towards a future project at the moment?
Yes, I am currently working on edits for my second novel, my second adult novel, and whatever people say about like second book syndrome and the second book being harder is so real. But this is a novel set in I I pitch it, this is a terrible pitch, but I pitch it as Piranesi meets the Backrooms
Oh.
because it is set in a mall in an alternate dimension parallel to ours, and it follows the main character who 10 years ago his girlfriend went missing in the mall and he thought she was dead. And he has just learned that this mall exists, this alternate dimension, and he is going to find her. And if sublimation is about diaspora and is about like being from somewhere else, this novel is about from being from New Jersey.
That sounds great. And as a neighbor to New Jersey, it sounds like it's of local interest too. So I'm
Yeah.
very excited to see that. Thank you very
Mhm.
much for taking the time away from your writing and from the conference that you are at currently.
Yeah,
I
of course.
appreciate.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be on.
Thanks. All right, listeners, please check out Sublimation. By the time that you hear this, it will have just entered the world. So please check it out at your favorite library or bookstore or website, wherever you like to go for books. Do you have a favorite bookstore, perhaps in Jersey, that you like to send people to?
I'm going to send people to Dungeon Books in Jersey City just because um they're doing my pre-order campaign and they're also like woman owned and do a bunch of D&D stuff and I love that.
Oh, excellent. All good reasons to go with them. All right. All right. Thank you for joining us again. It is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.